From the Chesapeake Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental reporting, this is Chesapeake Uncharted, the podcast that uncovers stories about the Bay, its interconnected ecosystem, and the people who rely on them. I'm Jeremy Cox. On today's episode,
it's really thinking about how to build those relationships where there's trust and there's understanding, and also acknowledging some of those wrongdoings. Okay, yeah, maybe we didn't do it right in the past and maybe we stepped on toes, but how do we shift that, rebuild relationships, and really think about what is best not only for the community but for the Bay?
the construction of new nuclear power plants, industrial sites, and landfills, community-level decisions about where to develop parks and where not to. Environmental injustices are endemic in the Chesapeake Bay watershed and beyond. Marginalized communities have shouldered a disproportionately heavy burden of society's environmental problems. Only in the past few decades has this been increasingly recognized as everyone's problem. In the month that this podcast is being released, environmental and social advocates are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the federal government's first formal recognition of the pollution disparities between our country's haves and have-nots. It came in 1994 when President Clinton signed Executive Order 12898. The directive called on federal agencies to address the disproportionate environmental and health consequences in minority and low-income communities. The anniversary was bittersweet. For much of those intervening years, advocates struggled to win legal support in the courts and funding from the government. Legally speaking, there hasn't been much movement on the federal level, but there have been significant strides to recognize injustice by top courts in certain states, including Virginia and Pennsylvania. And in terms of dollars and cents, the Biden administration's Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act have invested unprecedented amounts toward the cause. Traditionally, many mainstream environmental organizations have shown more interest in other matters, things like preserving wetlands, saving endangered animals, and promoting recycling. Important stuff, but people living in disadvantaged communities often felt like their environmental concerns weren't getting the same attention. Problems like poor air quality, lack of access to parkland, and the health consequences from excessive heat. Those same environmental groups who largely overlooked such problems are now, in many cases, admitting they were late getting on board, and there's a new generation of leaders pushing for action from within. Welcome to Season 3 of Chesapeake Uncharted. This time, our team here at the Bay Journal is interested in hearing from a younger generation of Bay leaders, the people who weren't born when the Chesapeake Bay cleanup formally began 40 years ago. With the Bay restoration effort facing its current set of cleanup goals in 2025, this felt like a good time to go searching for some inspiration. Each episode spotlights one of these wave makers. Today our guest is Carmera Thomas-Wilhite. In February 2023, she joined the Bay region's most influential environmental group, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, as its first Vice President for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice. How'd she get there? What's her mission? Find out in our conversation, which will begin after this break.
Hi, this is Laura Lutz, editor at the Chesapeake Bay Journal. I hope you're enjoying our podcast, and I'd like to invite you to join the community of Bay Journal readers. If you care about climate change, wildlife, clean air, healthy communities, and of course the Bay and its rivers, you'll find news you can use at the Bay Journal, along with some great ideas for outdoor travel. Our subscriptions are free. Check us out at bayjournal.com and click on subscribe to start receiving the best independent environmental news in the Bay region.
Hello again. On today's episode of Chesapeake Uncharted, we're listening to my interview with Carmera Thomas-Wilhite of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. In some ways, this conversation is a continuation of our recent episode featuring Randy Rowell, who has risen in the environmental ranks in the Bay region with his sights set on fighting injustice. Thomas-Wilhite has been on a similar journey, but she offers a unique vantage point, one with the full force of a group with thousands of members and millions of dollars a year in revenue. Off we go. Well, Carmera, thank you so much for coming on here. What do you do?
I am the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation.
All right. Well, can you unpack what that means then?
Sure. So I am a new department at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation working on internal and external equity principles. I think of my role as working with people, partnerships, and places. So we have 18 million people in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, each with different life experiences and backgrounds, and are impacted by pollution and solutions for the Chesapeake Bay restoration work, as well as employees of the organization who are important and valuable for the work that we do at the organization, and really deserve a sense of belonging and pride in the work, and also to be taken care of as their full selves in their employment, as well as partners. So we work with many partners throughout the watershed and making sure that we're being authentic and genuine in those relationships. And then the many places, whether it's some of our education centers or other properties that we either own or utilize on a constant basis, making sure that we're telling the full story of that history, especially as it relates to Indigenous and formerly enslaved communities and other communities around the Chesapeake Bay.
So it sounds like you're kind of like an actor on Broadway who gets to originate a role. You know, there's no playbook for you. What's that been like?
Yeah, no playbook. It's been interesting. So CBF has been kind of dipping its toe in some of this work, similar to other environmental organizations, and it all kind of hit the movement at around the same time. So we started doing some of this work, but to really have it formalized is really great. But it is really exciting because I get to make it my own. I get to make sure that I add a little piece of myself into this work. So, leading with my own style of leadership and making sure that I'm being empathetic and, taking care of people the way that I would like to be treated.
I like to ask everybody, what is your Chesapeake Bay origin story?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big story. So I grew up in Maryland. Both my parents are from Annapolis, and both of sets of grandparents lived in Annapolis, and I spent my summers hanging out with both sets. My parents really instilled a sense of stewardship in myself and in my sister, and spending summers at my grandparents, just having the exposure of being outdoors. My mom's parents were both 4-H leaders. My grandfather was an extension agent for University of Maryland and for the county, for Anne Arundel County. My grandmother being a teacher. I mean, we were gardening, we were fishing, swimming in the Severn River and on the bay. I went to college in North Carolina, decided to move back home and really find my roots again here in Annapolis area. And it's been a part of me ever since. So I think my family had a really big influence on that. And then some of the other experiences that I've had either throughout my career or as an adult have, solidified that as well.
But you studied, if I'm not mistaken, biology in North Carolina?
That's correct, yes.
And you were kind of heading toward public health. I wonder if your decision-making was influenced at that time by, historically the environmental movement, at least most publicly, in the media, and I think reflected on the ground, has been overwhelmingly white.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mentioned my grandfather when I was growing up. He had gotten a little sick, but he had told me stories of kind of the stress that he was under in his role. He was the first Black male and first Black person to work for Anne Arundel County Extension, and that was really big for him, but it was also really scary for him too, being in predominantly white spaces where he had come from Princess Anne before that, and he was, around UMES, so he was working at a historically Black college, and that was kind of a culture shock for him. And my grandmother was a teacher during the time of integration in Annapolis, so just hearing some of their experiences really made me think about the career that I wanted to go into and what I wanted to do with a part of my life and understanding that history. But when I looked at the environmental movement, you're right. I didn't really see myself in a lot of those spaces. I knew a few people that were doing it. I knew a few people that were in some of the sciences, but again, having some really hard challenges and really being authentically themselves. And that made me a little nervous. And I also didn't think that it was a possibility to make it a career. I didn't have that early exposure. A lot of my family, they're educators and, work with a lot of young people. So I thought that was the path that I was going to go into as well.
Well, this might be a good time to talk about, you've brought up in the past that a book called Black Faces, White Spaces had a big influence on you. Can you talk about what that book is about and what it meant to you?
Yeah, Carolyn Finney is the author of that book, and she writes about the Black experience in predominantly white spaces like national parks and camping and hiking. And I've talked to other, outdoor groups that have very similar backgrounds and experiences where, you go camping, but you really want to make sure you're safe and you want to make sure you're in the right place, and having people look at you weird or ask you questions about, oh, what are you doing here? Why are you here? And not really being able to be your full self there in those spaces. And that book really changed the way that I think about the things that I like to do. I love new experiences outdoors. I love trying new things. I never thought of it as being something that I would not do. So when I read that book, it made me think of, I'm in a lot of these things when I'm hiking or I'm going to different parks. I don't usually see a lot of people that are, look like me or families that look like me. So how can I change that? What can I be a part of to do that? But also, how can I just show up and continue to think about the things that I like to do, and how can I bring more people along with me that look like me, and really share that maybe it's not necessarily that Black people don't do those things. You just need to change your perspective and your bias and what you think those stereotypic things that people of color do in the outdoors.
Have you had that experience or yourself of, being in an outdoor space and being made to feel uncomfortable or, othered?
Yeah, for sure. My husband and I, we like to go camping a lot with our friends, and most of the time we're at state parks or national parks, but a lot of times we'll get kind of the questions, oh, is your first time camping? Do you like to do this? What brought you here? And we camp a lot. We camp at least twice a year, if not 3 times a year. And one of our friends, he's a former Boy Scout, and we have all the skills and gear and everything, but we always get some questions or some looks. So and we just we like to camp and hike and all of those things, but sometimes I do feel that way. I always question my safety if I'm alone sometimes too. So not just as a Black person, but also as a woman. So I think there are many times when I'm outdoors I feel that way, but that's changing. There are a lot of spaces where there are different groups that you can join, and different people are seeing and changing their perspective and what that looks like. I'm
curious what places or what place maybe inspires you the most that you've been to.
Oh my gosh, that's a really good one. That is a hard question.
I told you these would be hard questions.
Wow, I honestly think that for me, I have a lot of places that are nostalgic for me, that bring me the most joy. When I go to a local place like Jonas Green, or if I go to Sandy Point Park, I know that sounds really simple, but those are places I went to as a kid. And I mentioned I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. They took me to those places, and when I'm there, I smell some of the same smells. And, my cousins and I talk about the time where there was this awful fish kill at Sandy Point, and we were like stepping on fish bones, and it was gross, but it was just so funny because those are the things that we remember the most. Or my grandfather, I think literally driving us all over the state of Maryland just to show us almost every county in Maryland, because he knew the state really well, and he would tell us about different farms that he had visited and talk to them about their crops and things like that. So yeah, I don't know. I think Maryland, I'm a Marylander. I love it here, and I am so glad that I moved back home after college, because there's so much to do and there's so many things. You can go to the mountains and the bay and the ocean all in like a matter of 4.5 hours.
Well, so you joined the Chesapeake Conservation Corps, and, it's a novel experience from a personal standpoint, but it was a novel experience, period, because you were part of the inaugural class. Wow. So so you really, I guess you guys were the ones setting the tone for everybody else, right?
Yeah, of course. Setting the standard. Gosh, how many years ago? Like almost 13 years ago. That's crazy to think about. But yeah, I was in the inaugural class, and when that program first was announced, it was really geared towards diversifying the environmental space. There were 20 of us that were hired that year, and CBF was my host. I went through the whole ranking system, and when I was selected, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But my mentor was just like, I am excited to have someone who's interested in the bay, interested in planting trees, ready to drive trucks and tractors and all kinds of things. And I was just like, oh, wow, this is going to be fun. And she was right. That program, to me, honestly, was life-changing and career-changing, because it really set the trajectory for myself and the things that I was most interested in and the thing that I wanted to do moving forward. So I am extremely thankful for that program.
If folks are unaware, this is a program created by the Maryland legislature in 2010, geared toward people 18 to 25 years old, to pair them with environmental organizations for 1 year paid terms of service. But it sounds like you really got to see a little bit and do a little bit of everything there. Was there anything that really stuck out to you as an experience you had during that year?
Yeah, I planted a lot of trees. That was a lot of fun, but I think the most important part was it prepared me to talk to people about the importance of trees in the bay, and really work with people who shared the same passion. I also really enjoyed a lot of the professional development around that program, meeting with other cohort members, but also having the opportunity to interview and to meet other leaders of organizations and really start to build my network in the environmental community.
But then after a few years of doing that, you went back into the health field. You're doing this important work, but of course the Bay Foundation comes calling again. How did you end up going back into the environmental movement?
The Chesapeake Bay Foundation had just started a partnership with the Waterfront Partnership of Baltimore, and they were looking to create a oyster restoration and set a really large goal for swimmable, fishable harbor, and oyster restoration was a part of that. So how do you put 5 million oysters in the Baltimore harbor and grow them around bases there? So I applied for another position that was Healthy Harbor Manager, or mostly their volunteer coordinator for Waterfront Partnership and CBF. So working with both organizations to set up volunteer engagement around oyster restoration and cleaning around the watershed around the Baltimore harbor.
I'm curious, people listening to this in Baltimore, you're proud of your town and all, but you want to be realistic about it. I mean, having spent that time, looking so closely at that issue, do you see that swimmable, fishable goal is attainable for the harbor?
I think a goal is great to have. There are many other cities across the country that have waterways very similar to the Baltimore Harbor, where it is safe to swim on certain days and certain occasions. But I honestly think that we need to just be careful around some of the conversations around water quality, but also equity. Sometimes swimming, just the activity of swimming, is a privilege, and that makes me think about the people in Baltimore and some of the access that they have to the harbor. So to me, it's just an access issue as well as could be attainable goal.
And then you move over to the Conservation Fund, and I'm curious, you saw things, I'm sure, from a different perspective there. What did that experience mean to you?
Yeah, wow. That is at a national level, I realized that a lot of the issues, pollution, environmental and climate justice issues that we were talking about in the Chesapeake Bay watershed were the same across the country. There are a lot of communities that are up against some pollution and stormwater and impacts of underinvestment. And I was working on a program called Parks with Purpose, and we were working directly with community-based organizations and residents who were advocates for their own community and for themselves, and having a lot of self-determination and awareness about their experience and their access to different outdoors and stormwater pollution solutions. So we were working in North Carolina around a trail and access to a nature park and nature center, to Atlanta, with folks who were dealing with major stormwater issues because of upstream construction, and from building parks that were in communities that had many vacant lots or many vacancies in underserved communities and public housing. So it was really interesting just to see that the issues are the same, and people around the country are advocating for themselves and really self-determined to do something.
Why is it important to have those community voices lead and shape these kinds of initiatives?
I'm a believer because it's something that is real to me. You have people that have different perspectives and backgrounds, and we all bring, different uniqueness to this work, and it is not a privilege to breathe clean air or have clean water and have access to those resources. It's a right. I think that it's important that the community as a whole, and we understand that when it comes to solutions for big environmental problems, it takes all of us, whether that's the person that is in their community at their community meeting every night talking about stormwater issues because they are directly impacted by it, or the city council person that's advocating on their behalf, or the organization that's helping to fund those different initiatives. Each of us have a piece of it, and we all contribute and can contribute so much to the solutions because we're all impacted by the problems.
2020 comes along, and it's a very hard year in a lot of ways. And if there's anything good that came out of it, you saw the attention focused on racial justice, social justice. A lot of environmental groups, they start putting out DEIJ statements. What did that mean to you as those organizations started to look in the mirror a little bit?
Yeah, 2020 was a year that I think all of the unrest and things that we don't always want to talk about in this country kind of came to a head, and the murder of George Floyd was the catalyst for greater awareness about the issue of racial injustice in the US, period. And then COVID exacerbated all of those inequities when it came to access to healthcare and other things and vaccines. But it also caused us all to pause and really pay attention to what was happening. I think of COVID, not just as a human health crisis, but also as a way that we all had to take a beat and have to really pay attention to what was happening around us, because we had nowhere to go except for in our homes. So that was really an important time in our U.S. history and in our movement, because we know about the civil rights movement and some of the protests around the civil rights. And when George Floyd happened, it was a larger group of people, not only in the U.S. but globally, really seeing all eyes on this issue. So when environmental organizations saw what was happening, I don't think it was unique that they also had to be a part of it and make statements and dedicate and commit themselves to racial histories and understanding what that means as a part of their own organizations, but also who they were including in some of the work that they were doing in the environment and some of the erasure of some communities or disenfranchise of some communities as they were doing their environmental work and conservation works. And they're holding themselves accountable, which I think is huge.
Well, so you've been on the ground floor of efforts within the Chesapeake Bay Restoration to put a spotlight on and then actual action toward diversity and equity, serving on the action team, first of all, within the Chesapeake Bay program, and then now within the work group. I wonder if you could share with us some of the work you all have been doing.
Yeah, with the Bay program, they're really focusing on projects that include diverse voices, but also the federal and the nonprofit workforce. So who in the Bay community are actually working on some of these initiatives. We look a lot at data that's out there. Green 2.0 has a transparency report card, and just looking at the leadership and the staff that are a part of the Chesapeake Bay movement. The Bay program put goals, for hiring and retention in that space, but also talking about a lot of challenges and projects that we're doing around the watershed. And there have been some really great projects from, different federal agencies around acknowledging history, not only around Black History Month, but others, and thinking about who space is for and what these projects mean. And again, that federal funding. I mean, it's huge to see some federal agencies really have an opportunity to allocate funding to projects in community-based organizations or in communities that have been really on the front lines of a lot of this, environmental injustice.
Well, you're working for an organization like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which is, more aligned with the legacy environmental movement, if you want to call that. How can groups like the Bay Foundation build that kind of credibility, do you think, going forward?
Yeah, it's all about relationships and trust, right? So when you are working with different groups and different communities, it's not a transactional relationship. It's something that you're going into together.
Well, you said you've been on Zoom and Teams calls all day, so I probably don't want to keep you much longer. I just want to say thank you very much. I'm really grateful for you taking the time out to really help walk us through not only your life, but some of these really complex issues. Thank you, Carmera.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was a lot of fun talking to you.
Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you by the Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental news in the Chesapeake region. Production for this episode was by me, Jeremy Cox. The story was edited by Laura Lutz. Our marketing and advertising director is Jackie Kane. You can find more episodes of Chesapeake Uncharted on your favorite streaming service or at ChesapeakeUncharted.com. If you like what you're hearing, sign up for a free Bay Journal news subscription at BayJournal.com. Until next time, this has been Jeremy Cox. Take care.